The scent hit Elena Voss like a wave crashing over stone, and she froze in the middle of the crowded courtyard, her heart slamming against her ribs. Every wolf around her went still. Whispers rippled through the gathered pack. Fated mate. The words passed from mouth to mouth faster than wind through dry grass. Alpha Cain Blackthorn stood across the courtyard, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark eyes locked onto her with a look she could not read. For one breath, one single fragile breath, Elena let herself hope. She had spent her whole life on the edges of this pack, unnoticed, unimportant. The daughter of a mother who died young, and a father who left before she could remember his face. And now, by some miracle of the moon goddess, fate had chosen her to stand beside the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories. Then Cain's expression hardened. "No," he said, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard like a blade cutting through fog. "This cannot be my mate." Gasps rose from the crowd. Elena felt her stomach drop as if the ground beneath her had vanished. She took a step forward, unable to stop herself, her wolf howling in confusion at the rejection forming in the air between them. "Cain," she whispered, forgetting in her panic to use his title. "The bond doesn't lie. You feel it too. I know you do." His jaw tightened. Around them, pack members shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others staring with open curiosity, hungry for the drama unfolding before them. Cain's beta, a broad-shouldered wolf named Owen, stepped closer to his alpha, murmuring something low that Elena could not hear. "I feel nothing," Cain said, louder this time, loud enough for every wolf in the courtyard to hear clearly. "You are not worthy of standing beside an alpha. You are nobody, a servant's daughter. I reject this bond, and I reject you." The words landed like physical blows. Elena staggered back a step, her vision blurring with sudden tears she refused to let fall in front of the entire pack. She had imagined many outcomes for this moment, the moment every wolf dreamed of since childhood, but never this, never public humiliation delivered with such cold precision. "You don't mean that," she said, though her voice shook and betrayed the uncertainty clawing at her chest. "I mean every word," Cain replied. "Leave these lands before nightfall. You are no longer welcome among the Blackthorn pack." A collective gasp swept through the courtyard once more. Banishment was rare, reserved for traitors and criminals, not for a wolf whose only crime was being chosen by fate. Elena searched the crowd for a friendly face, someone who might speak up, but every wolf lowered their eyes, afraid to challenge their alpha's decision. Her hands trembled at her sides. She thought of her small room above the kitchens, the only home she had ever known, the friends she had made among the pack's lower ranks, the life she had built from nothing after her mother passed. All of it was being stripped away in a matter of seconds, because a powerful man decided she was beneath him. "Fine," she said, straightening her spine despite the ache spreading through her chest. "I will go. But know this, Cain Blackthorn, you cannot undo what the moon goddess has done. The bond exists whether you accept it or not." Cain's eyes flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been doubt, but he said nothing more, turning his back on her, and walking toward the pack house without a single glance behind him. Owen lingered a moment longer, his expression unreadable, before he too turned and followed his alpha inside. Elena stood alone in the courtyard as the crowd slowly dispersed, whispers trailing behind them like smoke. She felt every eye that lingered on her back, felt the weight of pity and judgment mixed together in equal measure. An older wolf named Clara, one of the few who had ever shown her kindness, approached hesitantly. "Elena," Clara said softly, "I am so sorry. This isn't right." "Thank you," Elena managed, her throat tight. "But there's nothing to be done now. He's made his decision, and an alpha's word is law." Clara reached out and squeezed her hand, pressing something small into her palm. Elena looked down to find a folded cloth containing a bit of dried meat and a small pouch of coins. "It isn't much," Clara whispered, "but it will help you on the road. Be safe, child. Wherever you go, be safe." Elena nodded, unable to speak past the lump rising in her throat, and made her way toward the small room she had called home for as long as she could remember. She packed quickly, her movements mechanical, numb with shock. A spare set of clothes, a hairbrush that had belonged to her mother, a small carved wolf figurine, the only gift her father had ever given her before he disappeared. By the time the sun began sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, Elena stood at the edge of Blackthorn territory, with a small bag slung over her shoulder. She looked back once at the pack house rising in the distance, its windows glowing with warm light, a life she would never be part of again. Something strange stirred inside her chest as she turned away, a warmth she could not explain, spreading slowly beneath her ribs like sunlight breaking through clouds. She pressed a hand against her heart, frowning at the sensation. Perhaps it was grief. Perhaps it was the broken bond settling into something new and unfamiliar. She had no way of knowing that this warmth was the first stirring of something far greater than heartbreak, something ancient and powerful beginning to wake within her. The forest swallowed her whole as she stepped beyond the borders of Blackthorn land, the trees growing thicker and the light growing dimmer with every step. Night birds called out overhead, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, though whether in warning or welcome, Elena could not tell. She pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders and pressed onward, refusing to look back again. She did not cry until she was certain no one could see her. Then, beneath the shadow of an ancient oak tree, she allowed herself to sink to the ground and weep for everything she had lost. For her home. For the life she had imagined with a mate who would cherish her. For the cruel twist of fate that had handed her a bond, only to have it shattered in front of the entire pack. But even as her tears fell, that strange warmth in her chest continued to glow, steady and patient, as though waiting for her to notice it. As though something within her already knew that her story was only just beginning, and that the greatest chapters of her life had not yet been written. Above her, hidden behind a veil of clouds, the moon began to rise, full and silver, bathing the forest floor in gentle light. Elena did not know it yet, but the moon goddess herself was watching, and what Cain Blackthorn had cast aside as worthless was, in truth, the rarest gift given to any wolf in 100 generations. She wiped her eyes, rose to her feet, and continued walking into the darkness, carrying within her a secret even she did not yet understand. The night stretched on, long and cold, and Elena walked until her legs ached and her feet blistered inside her worn boots. She passed through unfamiliar stretches of forest, crossing streams that soaked through her shoes, climbing over fallen logs slick with moss. Exhaustion pulled at her, but fear of what lingered in the shadows kept her moving. Unclaimed land between pack territories held dangers of its own, rogue wolves who answered to no alpha and no law, creatures far less predictable than the pack she had left behind. Around midnight, she found a small hollow beneath the roots of a massive fallen tree, and decided it would have to serve as shelter for the remainder of the night. She curled into the space, pulling her cloak around her like a blanket, and stared up at the fragments of sky visible through the tangled branches above. Sleep did not come easily. Every sound made her flinch, every rustle of leaves sent her heart racing. But somewhere in the depths of her exhaustion, she finally drifted into a restless slumber, her dreams filled with silver light and a voice she could not quite place, soft and warm, whispering words she could not understand. When morning came, pale and gray through the canopy above, Elena woke stiff and sore, but strangely more at peace than she had felt in years. The warmth in her chest remained, quiet and steady, and for reasons she could not explain, she felt a flicker of hope despite everything she had lost. She rose, brushed the dirt from her clothes, and continued walking, unaware that her greatest transformation had already begun. 3 days of walking had worn Elena down to something thin and fragile, a shadow of the woman who had stood proud in the Blackthorn courtyard. Her supplies had run out on the second day, and hunger gnawed steadily at her stomach, while her legs shook with every step. The warmth in her chest remained, strange and constant, but it could not fill an empty belly or heal blistered feet. She had crossed into territory she did not recognize, land that belonged to no pack she knew, wild and overgrown with brambles that tore at her clothes and skin. The trees here grew taller and older, their branches knitting together so tightly overhead that daylight barely reached the forest floor. Elena stumbled forward, one hand pressed against a tree trunk for support, her vision swimming at the edges. She did not see the border marker until she had nearly walked past it, a carved stone half hidden beneath a curtain of ivy, etched with symbols she recognized as belonging to the Whitmore pack. Relief and fear tangled together in her chest. She had heard of Whitmore before, a smaller pack known for keeping to itself, rarely engaging in the politics and conflicts that plagued larger territories like Blackthorn. Her legs gave out before she could decide what to do next. The ground rushed up to meet her, and the last thing she remembered was the sound of leaves crunching nearby, followed by a sharp intake of breath that did not belong to her. When Elena woke, she was lying on a narrow cot inside a small wooden cabin, a fire crackling in a stone hearth nearby. The scent of herbs and wood smoke filled the air, and sunlight streamed through a single window, casting a warm glow across the room. For a moment, she thought she might still be dreaming. "You're awake," said a voice, rough with age but gentle in tone. "Good. I was beginning to wonder if you'd sleep through the whole week." Elena turned her head to find an elderly woman seated in a chair beside the cot, her silver hair pulled back in a loose braid, her eyes sharp despite the deep lines etched into her face. She held a wooden bowl in her lap, steam rising from whatever simmered inside it. "Where am I?" Elena asked, her voice cracking from disuse. "Whitmore Land," the woman replied. "My name is Mabel. I found you collapsed near the border, half-starved and barely breathing. Lucky for you, I was out gathering herbs at the time, or you might have become a meal for something far less kind than an old healer." Elena tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced her back down against the pillow. Mabel clicked her tongue and pressed a hand gently against her shoulder. "Slow down, child. You've been through something terrible. That much is plain to see. Eat first. Talk later." Elena did not have the strength to argue. She accepted the bowl of broth Mabel offered, sipping slowly at first, then more eagerly, as warmth spread through her exhausted body. Mabel watched her with quiet patience, saying nothing until the bowl was empty. "Now," Mabel said, setting the empty bowl aside, "tell me your name, and tell me what brought a young wolf so far from her own territory, alone and starving, with a look in her eyes like she's lost everything she ever cared about." Elena hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to a stranger, however kind she seemed. But something about Mabel's steady gaze, patient and free of judgment, loosened the knot of fear in her chest. "My name is Elena," she said quietly. "Elena Voss. I was cast out of the Blackthorn pack, banished." Mabel's eyebrows rose slightly, but she said nothing, waiting for Elena to continue. "I found my fated mate," Elena continued, her voice growing thick with emotion. "The Alpha himself. But he rejected me in front of the entire pack. He called me unworthy and ordered me to leave before nightfall." A long silence stretched between them. Mabel's expression shifted, something thoughtful passing behind her eyes, though Elena could not guess what the old woman might be thinking. "Cain Blackthorn," Mabel said finally, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "I have heard of him. A powerful alpha, proud and unyielding. It does not surprise me that he would reject a mate he saw as beneath his status, foolish as that decision surely was." "You know of him?" Elena asked. "Word travels between packs, even ones that keep mostly to themselves," Mabel said. "But tell me, child, how do you feel? Not about the rejection, about yourself. Has anything felt different since you left Blackthorn Land?" The question caught Elena off guard. She thought of the warmth that had bloomed in her chest that very night, the strange comfort that had followed her through the darkest hours of her journey, the odd dreams filled with silver light. "There is a warmth," Elena admitted slowly, "in my chest. It started the night I was banished, and it hasn't left since. I thought perhaps it was grief, or the broken bond settling into something else, but it doesn't feel like sadness. It feels like something waiting." Mabel's gaze sharpened, and she leaned forward slightly, studying Elena's face with renewed interest. "Waiting for what, do you think?" "I don't know," Elena said, shaking her head. "I've never felt anything like it before." Mabel rose from her chair, moving toward the small window, staring out at the forest beyond, as though searching for answers among the trees. When she spoke again, her voice had grown quieter, more careful. "There are old stories, child. Tales passed down through generations of healers and elders. Stories many young wolves today dismiss as nothing more than legend. They speak of a blessing given by the moon goddess herself, bestowed upon a chosen wolf once in many, many generations. A wolf capable of healing what is broken, uniting what has been divided, carrying within them a power greater than any single pack or alpha." Elena's breath caught in her throat. "You think that's what this is? What's happening to me?" "I think," Mabel said slowly, turning back to face her, "that a wolf, who feels a strange warmth blooming in her chest, after being cast aside by the very fate that chose her, deserves more careful attention than most would give her. I have lived a long life, Elena, and I have never once seen the signs of the moon blessed with my own eyes. But I have heard the stories enough times to recognize the shape of them when they appear. Elena stared at the old woman, unsure whether to feel hope or fear at the possibility being suggested. What happens to a wolf who carries this blessing? That, Mabel admitted, depends entirely on the wolf herself, and on how she chooses to carry the weight of it. Power like that draws attention, child, both welcome and unwelcome. Some will see you as a miracle, others will see you as a threat, or worse, a tool to be used for their own ambitions. The weight of Mabel's words settled heavily over Elena, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside the small window, the wind stirred through the trees, carrying with it the distant call of some unseen bird. Rest now, Mabel said finally, her tone softening. Whatever is happening within you, it will not resolve itself in a single afternoon. You are safe here, for as long as you need. Whitmore Land does not turn away those in need, and I will not turn away a wolf who may carry something far greater than either of us yet understands. Elena nodded, gratitude swelling in her chest alongside the persistent warmth that refused to fade. She sank back against the pillow, her eyes growing heavy, despite the questions swirling through her mind. As sleep pulled her under once more, she thought she heard, faint and distant, a voice whispering words of comfort, in a language she somehow understood, despite never having learned it. The days that followed passed in a slow, gentle rhythm. Mabel nursed her back to health with herbal remedies and patient care, refusing to let her leave the cabin until her strength had fully returned. Elena helped where she could, gathering herbs, tending the small garden behind the cabin, learning the names of plants she had never encountered within Blackthorn territory. She noticed the strange occurrences slowly at first, easy to dismiss as coincidence. A wilted plant in Mabel's garden straightened and bloomed, after Elena knelt beside it one morning, tending to the soil with careful hands. A frightened rabbit, that should have fled at her approach, instead sat calmly at her feet, watching her with dark, curious eyes. Small things, easy to overlook, until they began happening too often to ignore. Mabel watched these moments with growing certainty in her eyes, though she said little, seeming to want Elena to reach her own conclusions in her own time. But the warmth in Elena's chest continued to grow, steady and patient, as though something ancient and powerful was slowly awakening within her, preparing her for a destiny she had not yet begun to understand. 2 weeks had passed since Elena arrived on Whitmore Land, and the cabin she shared with Mabel had slowly begun to feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a home. Her strength had fully returned, color back in her cheeks, the hollow look gone from her eyes. Yet the strange occurrences surrounding her had only grown more frequent and more difficult to explain away. It happened again, on a quiet afternoon, while Elena knelt in the garden, pulling weeds from around a row of struggling herbs. She noticed a young sapling nearby, its leaves curled and brown, clearly dying despite Mabel's best efforts to save it. Without thinking much of it, Elena rested her palm gently against its thin trunk, murmuring something soft and wordless under her breath, a gesture born purely of instinct rather than intention. The sapling shuddered beneath her hand. Elena gasped and pulled back, watching in stunned silence as the curled brown leaves slowly unfurled, turning a vibrant green before her eyes. New growth sprouted along its branches within seconds, as though weeks of healthy growth had been compressed into a single heartbeat. "Mabel," Elena called out, her voice trembling. "Mabel, come quickly." The old woman emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron, and stopped short at the sight of the transformed sapling. She approached slowly, almost reverently, running her fingers along the new leaves, as though testing whether they were truly real. "This is not something a healer's herbs could accomplish," Mabel said quietly. "Not in a single moment, not like this." "I don't understand what's happening to me," Elena admitted, her hands still trembling at her sides. "Every day, something new. Yesterday it was the birds gathering outside my window, unafraid, letting me touch them like they'd known me my whole life. The day before, I dreamed of a woman made entirely of moonlight, speaking words I couldn't quite make out, though somehow I understood the feeling behind them." Mabel straightened, her expression growing serious. "Tell me about this dream in more detail. Every detail you can remember." Elena closed her eyes, trying to recall the fading images. She stood in a field of silver grass, beneath a sky filled with more stars than I've ever seen. She didn't speak in words exactly, more like feelings that settled into my mind. I felt chosen, cherished, like she was proud of something I hadn't done yet. The moon goddess appears to her chosen vessels in dreams, long before their power fully awakens, Mabel said, almost to herself. The stories say she prepares them slowly, gently, so the weight of the blessing doesn't shatter them before they're ready to carry it. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, staring down at the newly transformed sapling. If this is true, Mabel, if I really am this vessel you speak of, what am I supposed to do? I don't know anything about leading a pack, or healing rifts between wolves who've hated each other for generations. I was barely acknowledged within my own pack. How could I possibly be meant for something so much bigger? Mabel placed a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder, her touch steady and reassuring. The moon goddess does not choose her vessels based on status or birthright, child. She chooses hearts capable of compassion, strength forged through hardship, and a spirit unwilling to break, no matter how many times the world tries to convince her that she is worthless. You survived banishment. You survived starvation and exhaustion on unfamiliar roads, and still, your first instinct upon finding a dying plant was to save it rather than walk past it. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of heart the goddess has chosen. Tears pricked at the corners of Elena's eyes, though this time they came from something gentler than grief. I don't feel ready for any of this. No one ever does, Mabel said with a small, knowing smile. But readiness comes with time, and you have already begun the journey, whether you realize it or not. Come, there is something I think you should see. Mabel led her toward the back of the cabin, to a small wooden chest, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, that Elena had never noticed before. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, lay an old leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age, filled with handwritten text and delicate illustrations depicting wolves bathed in silver light. This book has been passed down through generations of Whitmore healers, Mabel explained, carefully lifting it from its resting place. It contains everything our ancestors recorded about the moon blessed, gathered from stories told across many packs over hundreds of years. I have read it more times than I can count, hoping one day I might witness the signs myself. I did not expect that day would come while I still had breath left in my body. Elena reached out hesitantly, running her fingers along the worn leather cover before Mabel gently placed the book into her hands. She opened it carefully, studying the faded illustrations of wolves, surrounded by blooming flowers and gentle moonlight, their paws resting protectively over injured packmates. The blessing grants the chosen vessel abilities beyond ordinary wolves, Mabel continued, settling into a chair nearby, as Elena turned the pages slowly. Accelerated healing for herself and others, a calming presence that soothes aggression and eases conflict between rival packs. Prophetic dreams that offer glimpses of what is to come, though rarely in language easy to interpret. And, most importantly, the ability to unite what has long been divided, to heal rifts between packs that have warred for generations. Why would the goddess choose someone to carry such power now? Elena asked, looking up from the book. Is something happening that requires it? Mabel's expression grew troubled. The goddess rarely acts without reason, child. If she has chosen to awaken this blessing after so many generations of silence, it likely means the packs are approaching a time of great upheaval. Whether war, famine, or some other calamity, I cannot say. But I do not believe it is coincidence that you carry this gift now, of all times. A chill settled over Elena despite the warm afternoon sun filtering through the cabin windows. She thought of Cain, of the pride and arrogance that had led him to reject her so publicly, and wondered whether his own pack might soon face troubles neither of them could yet foresee. What happens to him? Elena asked quietly. Cain, the one who rejected me. Does rejecting a fated mate carry consequences beyond humiliation? Mabel's eyes softened with something close to sympathy, though her words remained honest. Rejecting a mate chosen by fate is never without cost, Elena. The bond does not simply disappear because one party refuses it. It lingers, unraveling slowly, weakening the wolf who rejected it from the inside. Some describe it as a slow illness of the spirit, draining strength and clarity over time. Cain Blackthorn may currently believe he has escaped consequence by casting you aside, but I suspect that belief will not last much longer. Elena felt a strange mixture of vindication and worry twist together in her chest, emotions she did not fully understand, given how cruelly he had treated her. I should feel satisfied knowing he suffers for what he did, but I don't, not entirely. That, Mabel said gently, is further proof of the compassion the goddess saw within you. A lesser wolf might revel in his downfall. You, instead, feel conflicted, even after everything he took from you. Elena closed the ancient book carefully, holding it against her chest, as though it might offer some protection against the uncertainty of what lay ahead. What do I do now, Mabel? How do I learn to control whatever this blessing is becoming? Patience, Mabel said simply, and practice. The dreams will guide you, in their own time, toward understanding, and I will teach you everything within these pages that might help prepare you for what's to come. But know this, child, whatever destiny awaits you, you do not have to face it alone. Whitmore Land, and this old healer, will stand beside you for as long as you need us. Elena felt the warmth in her chest pulse gently, as though in agreement, as though something ancient and wise was settling more comfortably into place within her. Outside, the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the garden, where the once dying sapling now stood tall and vibrant, a small testament to the power quietly awakening inside her. That night, as Elena drifted into sleep, the dream returned once more, clearer than before. The woman made of moonlight stood waiting for her in the silver field, her expression warm and knowing, as though she had been watching Elena's entire journey unfold from some distant vantage point beyond mortal sight. This time, words formed clearly in Elena's mind, gentle but unmistakable. You were never unworthy, child. You were simply waiting for the moment the world would finally see what I have always known. Elena woke with tears on her cheeks, but for the first time since her banishment, they were tears of quiet determination rather than sorrow. A month had passed since Elena's arrival on Whitmore Land, and the change within her had become impossible to hide or deny. Word had begun to spread quietly among the smaller circle of Whitmore pack members who lived near Mabel's cabin, whispers of a stranger, with a healer's touch stronger than any they had witnessed before, and eyes that sometimes seemed to catch the moonlight in ways no ordinary wolf's eyes could. Elena sat beneath the old oak tree behind the cabin one crisp morning, practicing the breathing exercises Mabel had taught her, attempting to focus the strange energy that now hummed constantly beneath her skin. She had learned, through trial and gentle guidance, that the warmth in her chest could be directed outward when she concentrated, though controlling its intensity remained a challenge. A young wolf named Finn approached hesitantly, keeping a respectful distance as he had learned to do over the past week since Mabel first introduced him to Elena. He was barely more than a boy, recently old enough to shift for the first time, and he carried a nervous energy that reminded Elena faintly of herself before everything changed. "Miss Elena," Finn said, wringing his hands together, "my sister is sick. Really sick. Clara has tried everything she knows, but nothing is working, and my parents are scared she won't make it through the week." Elena rose immediately, brushing dirt from her clothes. "Take me to her." Finn led her through the small cluster of homes that made up this quiet corner of Whitmore territory, past curious onlookers who paused their morning chores to watch the stranger everyone had begun talking about. Elena kept her eyes forward, focusing on the task ahead rather than the weight of their attention. Inside a modest wooden house, a young girl no older than 7 lay pale and trembling beneath a pile of blankets, her breathing shallow and labored. A woman Elena assumed was Finn's mother knelt beside the bed, dabbing a damp cloth against the girl's fevered forehead, while an older woman, likely the pack's healer Clara, stood nearby, with an expression of helpless frustration. "She won't respond to any of my remedies," Clara said quietly, as Elena approached. "The fever won't break, and her breathing grows weaker by the hour. I've done everything within my knowledge, and it isn't enough." Elena knelt beside the small bed, studying the girl's flushed face, feeling the warmth in her chest pulse in response to the suffering before her, almost as though it recognized an opportunity it had been waiting for. She reached out and gently rested her palm against the girl's forehead, closing her eyes and allowing the warmth to flow outward, the way Mabel had taught her to practice, though she had never attempted anything of this magnitude before. A soft golden light seemed to emanate from beneath her palm, faint but unmistakable, drawing gasps from Finn's mother and Clara alike. The girl's ragged breathing began to even out, her trembling limbs growing still, color slowly returning to her pale cheeks. Elena kept her hands steady, pouring every ounce of focus she possessed into the healing warmth, until finally the girl's eyes fluttered open, clear and alert for the first time in days. "Mama?" the girl whispered, her voice weak but steady. Finn's mother burst into tears, gathering her daughter into her arms, murmuring words of relief and gratitude. Clara stared at Elena with wide, astonished eyes, taking a step back, as though seeing her clearly for the first time. "That was not medicine," Clara said quietly. "That was something else entirely." Elena rose unsteadily to her feet, exhaustion washing over her in a sudden wave, now that the healing was complete. "I don't fully understand it myself," she admitted. "But I'm glad it worked. I'm glad she's safe." Word of the healing spread through the small community within hours, and by the following morning, a steady stream of Whitmore pack members had begun arriving at Mabel's cabin, some seeking healing for minor ailments, others simply curious to see the stranger who had performed what many were already calling a miracle. Elena found herself overwhelmed by the sudden attention, uncertain how to navigate the mixture of hope and scrutiny now directed her way. Mabel handled the growing crowd with practiced patience, gently turning away those whose concerns did not warrant Elena's limited strength, while allowing genuine cases of need to approach. Each healing left Elena more drained than the last, though she noticed her stamina improving gradually with practice, much like a muscle growing stronger through repeated use. It was inevitable, given the growing whispers, that word would eventually reach Alpha Gareth Whitmore himself. He arrived at Mabel's cabin on the 4th day following the healing, accompanied by 2 of his most trusted guards, his expression unreadable as he studied Elena with careful, calculating eyes. "I've heard remarkable things about you," Gareth said, his voice measured and controlled. "A stranger, arriving injured and alone, who now performs healings that rival anything our pack's most skilled healers have ever accomplished. I find myself curious about who you truly are, and what brought you to my territory." Elena straightened, meeting his gaze despite the nervousness fluttering in her stomach. "My name is Elena Voss. I was banished from the Blackthorn pack after being rejected by my fated mate. Mabel took me in when I collapsed near your border, and I've been recovering here since." Gareth's expression shifted slightly at the mention of Blackthorn, something calculating passing behind his eyes. Cain Blackthorn rejected a fated mate. That is not a decision made lightly, nor without consequence for a pack's stability. "Interesting. I don't wish to cause any trouble for your pack, Alpha Gareth," Elena said carefully. "I'm grateful for the shelter and kindness I've received here, and I only wish to help where I can, using whatever gift I seem to have been given." Gareth studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before glancing toward Mabel. "You believe she carries the old blessing, the one spoken of in the ancient texts." "I believe the evidence speaks for itself," Mabel replied evenly. "The healings, the strange occurrences, the dreams she describes. I have studied the old stories my entire life, Alpha, and I have never witnessed signs so clear." Gareth turned his attention back to Elena, and for a moment, she felt as though she were being weighed and measured, though whether as an asset or a liability, she could not tell. "If what Mabel believes is true, then you carry something of tremendous value, Elena Voss. Value that other packs, less scrupulous than mine, might attempt to seize for their own purposes." A chill settled over Elena at the implication in his words. "You're suggesting someone might come after me." "I'm suggesting caution," Gareth said. "Word travels quickly between packs, especially word of miracles performed by mysterious strangers. You are welcome to remain under Whitmore's protection, provided you continue using your gifts to benefit those in need. But understand that your presence here is no longer a secret, and secrets of this magnitude rarely remain contained for long." After Gareth departed, Elena sat in troubled silence beside the cabin's small fire, turning his warning over in her mind. Mabel joined her quietly, sensing the weight pressing down on her young companion's shoulders. "He's right to worry, isn't he?" Elena asked softly. "Others will come looking, once they hear what I can do." "Likely, yes," Mabel admitted. "But you are not without allies, Elena. Gareth may be cautious and calculating, but he is not cruel, and Whitmore Pack has never been known to abandon those who seek shelter within its borders. Whatever comes next, you will not face it unprepared, or alone." Elena stared into the flickering flames, thinking of Cain, wondering whether news of her healing abilities had already begun traveling toward Blackthorn territory, wondering how he might react upon learning what he had so carelessly cast aside. The warmth in her chest pulsed steadily, patient and constant, as though quietly reassuring her that whatever trials lay ahead, she was growing stronger, day by day, ready to meet them. Cain Blackthorn had not slept properly in weeks, and the toll it took on him had become impossible to hide from his pack. He stood before the tall mirror in his private quarters, studying the dark circles beneath his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands that had never existed before the night he rejected Elena. His reflection looked like a stranger wearing his face, gaunt and hollow in ways that unsettled him deeply. A sharp knock sounded at his door, and Owen entered without waiting for a response, his expression tight with concern he had been trying, and failing, to hide for days. The Southern Patrol reported movement along the Ashgrove border again last night, Owen said, his voice carefully neutral, though Kane could hear the worry threaded beneath it. Third time this month, they're testing our defenses, Kane, probing for weaknesses. Increase the patrols, Kane said, his voice rougher than he intended, scratchy from restless nights and something else he could not quite name. Double the guard along that stretch. We've already stretched our forces thin, Owen replied carefully. Kane, I need to say something, and I need you to actually hear it this time, instead of dismissing it like you have every other time I've tried. Kane turned from the mirror, fixing his beta with a hard stare. Say it then. You're not well, Owen said bluntly. Everyone sees it, even if no one dares speak of it openly. You've grown weaker these past weeks, slower in training, distracted during pack meetings. Your control over the shift has become unpredictable, and twice now you've lost your temper in ways that frightened wolves, who have followed you loyally for years. Something is wrong, and I think we both know when it started. Kane's jaw tightened, and he turned away, unwilling to meet Owen's steady gaze. It's nothing. Exhaustion from managing the border threats, that's all. Kane, Owen pressed, his tone softening slightly. You rejected your fated mate, in front of the entire pack. I've read enough of the old records to know that rejection carries a cost. A real one, not just for pride, but for the body and spirit both. Is it possible that what's happening to you now is connected? The question hung heavily in the air between them. Kane wanted desperately to dismiss it, to insist that his declining strength had nothing to do with the woman he had cast aside without a second thought. But the tremor in his hands, the restless nights plagued by dreams he could not remember upon waking, the strange hollowness that had settled into his chest since that night, all of it pointed toward a truth he had been refusing to acknowledge. Even if it is, Kane said finally, his voice quiet but firm, there is nothing to be done about it now. She's gone. I made my decision, and an alpha does not go chasing after decisions he's already made public. An alpha also doesn't lead his pack into vulnerability out of pride, Owen countered, his patience clearly wearing thin. Ashgrove wolves are circling our borders, like they can smell blood in the water, Kane. If your strength continues to fail, our entire pack becomes vulnerable to attack. This isn't only about you anymore. Kane's fists clenched at his sides, frustration and fear mixing together in a combination he rarely allowed himself to feel. What would you have me do, Owen? Track her down and beg forgiveness? I have my pride to consider. Pride, Owen repeated, shaking his head slowly. Pride is what got us into this situation in the first place. I watched you reject a bond the moon goddess herself chose for you, over something as trivial as her low standing within our pack. I've stayed loyal to you through many decisions I disagreed with, Kane, but this one, I fear, may cost us everything, if it isn't corrected soon. Before Kane could respond, another knock interrupted them, this one hesitant and quick. A young messenger wolf entered, bowing quickly before speaking. Alpha. Forgive the interruption, but news has arrived from the eastern trade routes. Travelers speak of a healer near Whitmore territory, performing miracles, healing the sick and injured with abilities beyond anything natural. Kane's attention sharpened immediately, some instinct within him recognizing significance in the news before his conscious mind fully understood why. What else do they say of this healer? Only that she arrived recently, injured and alone, taken in by an elderly healer on Whitmore land. The messenger continued. Some say her eyes catch moonlight in ways no ordinary wolves do. Others whisper she might carry an old blessing, though most dismiss such talk as exaggeration born from grateful patience. The messenger departed after being dismissed, leaving Kane standing motionless, his mind racing through possibilities he had refused to entertain until this exact moment. Whitmore territory. A healer, injured and alone, arriving recently. The timing aligned too precisely with Elena's banishment to be coincidence, though he desperately wanted it to be. Kane, Owen said slowly, watching the realization dawn across his alpha's face. You don't think? I don't know what to think, Kane admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But if it is her, If she truly carries some ancient blessing I dismissed as unworthy, then I have made a mistake far greater than simple pride would suggest. Owen said nothing, allowing Cain the space to work through the tangled mixture of guilt, fear, and reluctant hope now churning within him. For weeks, Cain had convinced himself that his declining strength stemmed purely from the stress of managing border conflicts and pack responsibilities. But deep down, in a place he had refused to examine too closely, he had always suspected the truth Owen now spoke aloud. "I need proof," Cain said finally, straightening his shoulders despite the persistent weakness plaguing his body. "Send scouts toward Whitmore territory, quietly. I need to know if this healer is who I fear she might be, before I decide what action, if any, needs to be taken." "And if she is?" Owen asked. "What then, Cain? Will you swallow your pride and seek her forgiveness? Or will you let stubbornness continue draining you until there's nothing left to lead this pack with?" Cain did not answer immediately, staring instead toward the window overlooking Blackthorn territory, the lands he had sworn to protect and lead with strength and honor. The Ashgrove threat loomed larger with each passing week, and his own weakening condition only made that threat more dangerous. Whatever pride had driven his decision that fateful night, he could no longer afford to let it continue unchecked, not when the safety of his entire pack now hung precariously in the balance. "Send the scouts," Cain said finally, his voice quiet but resolute. "I need answers, Owen. Whatever those answers turn out to be, I need to know the truth before this weakness costs us more than just my own comfort." Owen nodded, relief evident in his expression, though concern still lingered heavily behind his eyes. As he turned to leave, Cain called out once more, his voice softer than Owen had heard in weeks. "Owen, if it is her, if I truly turned away something as rare and precious as the old stories describe, out of nothing more than wounded pride and misplaced arrogance, what kind of alpha does that make me?" Owen paused at the doorway, considering his response carefully before speaking. "The kind who still has a chance to make things right, Cain, provided he's willing to set aside his pride long enough to actually try. But that chance grows smaller with every day you continue to hesitate." The door closed quietly behind him, leaving Cain alone with his thoughts and the persistent, hollow ache that had settled deep within his chest since the night he had so carelessly discarded the one thing fate had chosen specifically for him. Alpha Roland Ashgrove stood at the edge of his war room, studying a hand-drawn map spread across the wide wooden table before him, his fingers tracing the boundary lines separating his territory from Blackthorn land. Reports from his scouts had been consistent for weeks now, painting a picture Roland found increasingly difficult to ignore. Cain Blackthorn, once considered among the most formidable alphas in the region, had grown visibly weaker, his patrols disorganized, his usually sharp instincts dulled by something none of Roland's spies could quite identify. "You're certain of these reports?" Roland asked, glancing toward his second-in-command, a stocky wolf named Perry, who had served as his most trusted advisor for over a decade. "Certain enough," Perry confirmed. 3 separate scouts have confirmed the same pattern. Blackthorn's alpha struggles to maintain his shift during training exercises. His temper has grown unpredictable, his decisions increasingly erratic. Whatever afflicts him, it's real, and it's getting worse. Roland allowed a slow smile to spread across his face, the expression of a predator sensing vulnerability in prey it had long circled from a cautious distance. "Blackthorn territory has resources we've coveted for generations, Perry. Fertile hunting grounds, access to the northern trade routes, timber resources our own territory lacks. If their alpha's strength truly fails him, this may be the opportunity we've waited years to seize." "There are risks," Perry cautioned. "Even weakened, Blackthorn's forces remain substantial, and Cain's beta, Owen, has proven himself a capable strategist in the past. We shouldn't underestimate them simply because their alpha shows signs of weakness." "No," Roland agreed, his expression turning thoughtful. "But weakness at the top inevitably spreads throughout an entire pack, Perry. Soldiers lose confidence in leadership they sense is faltering. Discipline crumbles. Fear takes root where certainty once stood firm. Give it a few more weeks, and Blackthorn's forces will be ripe for the taking, provided we position ourselves correctly beforehand." Perry nodded slowly, though uncertainty still lingered in his expression. "And if his condition improves? If whatever weakens him resolves itself before we're prepared to act?" "Then we adjust our plans accordingly," Roland said simply. "But I do not intend to let this opportunity slip away out of excessive caution." Continue the border testing, Perry. Keep pressure on their patrols. Gather what intelligence you can regarding their defensive capabilities. When the moment comes to strike, I want us fully prepared to seize everything Blackthorn territory has to offer. Meanwhile, on Whitmore land, Elena's growing reputation had begun attracting attention far beyond what either she or Mabel had anticipated. Nearly every day now brought new visitors seeking her healing touch, some traveling considerable distances after hearing whispered stories of the miracle worker residing on Whitmore territory. Elena found herself both humbled and exhausted by the constant demand, though the warmth within her chest seemed to grow stronger with each healing performed, rather than depleting as she had initially feared. Alpha Gareth had taken a keener interest in her presence since their first meeting, visiting Mabel's cabin more frequently, asking careful questions about the extent of her abilities and the nature of the dreams that continued visiting her most nights. Elena sensed a calculating quality behind his interest, though she could not yet determine whether his intentions leaned toward genuine concern for her well-being or something more strategic in nature. "You've become quite valuable to my pack's reputation," Gareth observed one afternoon, watching as Elena finished treating an elderly wolf's chronic joint pain with a gentle application of her healing warmth. "Word of your abilities has spread even to neighboring territories. Some now travel considerable distances specifically to seek treatment on Whitmore land." "I only wish to help those who need it," Elena replied carefully, wiping her hands on a nearby cloth. "I have no interest in becoming a spectacle or a bargaining tool for pack politics, Alpha Gareth." Gareth's expression remained carefully neutral. "Of course, though you must understand, Elena, that a wolf capable of what you've demonstrated inevitably becomes entangled in matters larger than personal preference. Other packs will notice your growing reputation, some perhaps less interested in simple healing than in the strategic advantages your presence might offer their territory." "Are you suggesting someone might try to take me by force?" Elena asked, a chill settling over her despite the warm afternoon sun. "I'm suggesting caution remains wise," Gareth said. "Whitmore Pack will continue offering you protection for as long as you require it. But I would be remiss not to warn you that the world beyond these borders grows more aware of your presence with each passing week, and not everyone who learns of your gifts will approach with peaceful intentions." That evening, as Elena sat with Mabel beside the familiar warmth of the cabin's hearth, she found herself unable to shake the unease Gareth's words had stirred within her. "Do you think he's right to worry?" she asked quietly. "About others coming for me?" Mabel considered the question carefully before responding. "Power like yours has always drawn both reverence and greed throughout history, child. I would be lying if I claimed there was no cause for concern. But you are not without strength of your own, Elena, nor without allies willing to stand beside you should trouble arise." Elena stared into the flickering flames, thinking of the dreams that continued visiting her most nights, growing clearer and more insistent with each passing week. The woman made of moonlight had begun speaking more directly now, offering fragments of guidance that Elena struggled to fully interpret, warnings of conflict approaching, urging her to prepare herself for choices that would test the very core of who she was becoming. "I dreamed again last night," Elena said softly. She spoke of conflict approaching, of choices I would need to make that would shape more than just my own fate. I don't fully understand what she means, but the warning felt urgent, more urgent than any dream before it. Mabel's expression grew solemn. "Trust the guidance the goddess offers you, Elena, even when its meaning remains unclear. The blessing you carry was not given without purpose, and I suspect whatever conflict approaches will call upon abilities you have not yet begun to fully explore." Outside the cabin, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees with a restless energy that seemed to mirror the uncertainty settling over the quiet corner of Whitmore territory Elena had come to call home. Far to the north, along the tense border shared between Blackthorn and Ashgrove lands, tensions continued mounting steadily toward a breaking point neither pack had yet fully anticipated. And somewhere between these two struggling territories, an old prophecy long dismissed as legend was slowly, inexorably, drawing itself toward fulfillment. The Whitmore pack held a gathering each season to honor the moon goddess, a tradition older than anyone currently living could properly trace, marked by shared meals, songs passed down through generations, and quiet ceremonies performed beneath the open sky. Elena had attended the previous gathering as little more than a curious observer, still uncertain of her place within a pack that was not truly her own. This time, however, Alpha Gareth had specifically requested her presence at the ceremonial fire. a request that filled her with a nervous anticipation she could not fully explain. The gathering took place in a wide clearing at the heart of Whitmore territory, where a massive stone circle marked the ceremonial grounds, worn smooth by centuries of use. Pack members gathered in loose circles around a central fire, their faces lit by flickering orange light as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars began appearing overhead. Elena stood near Mabel, her nerves fraying slightly under the weight of curious glances directed her way from every corner of the gathering. Clara, the pack's healer, approached carrying a young man Elena recognized as one of the pack's guards, his leg wrapped in bandages that had clearly seen better days. "Elena," Clara said, her voice tight with worry. "He was injured during patrol yesterday. A fall from rocky terrain along the eastern border. I've done what I can, but the wound has taken a bad turn, infection setting in faster than my remedies can manage." Elena knelt immediately beside the injured guard, unwrapping the bandages carefully to reveal an ugly wound along his calf, red and swollen, with clear signs of infection spreading beneath the skin. Without hesitation, she rested her palm gently against the wound, closing her eyes and drawing upon the warmth that had become increasingly familiar and controllable with each healing she performed. This time, however, something different happened. The golden light that emanated from her palm grew brighter than ever before, spreading not just across the wound, but seeming to ripple outward, visible even to those standing several paces away. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd as the infection visibly receded, the swelling diminishing rapidly, torn flesh knitting itself back together with a speed that defied all natural explanation. The guard's eyes widened in shock as he flexed his leg experimentally, finding it fully healed, without even a scar remaining to mark where the injury had been. "I feel nothing," he said, astonishment coloring his voice. "No pain at all." A hush fell over the entire gathering as pack members stared at Elena, with expressions ranging from awe to something closer to reverence. Mabel stepped forward, addressing the crowd in a clear, steady voice that carried easily across the silent clearing. "What you have witnessed tonight," Mabel announced, "is no ordinary healing. This young woman carries a blessing spoken of only in our oldest stories, a gift bestowed by the moon goddess herself upon a chosen vessel once in many, many generations. I have studied the ancient texts my entire life, and I stand before you now certain of what we have all just witnessed." Murmurs of astonishment and disbelief rippled through the crowd, though many present had already begun connecting the dots based on weeks of whispered stories regarding Elena's healing abilities. Alpha Gareth stepped forward from where he had been observing quietly, his expression a careful mixture of respect and calculated interest. "Elena Voss," Gareth said, his voice carrying authority across the gathered crowd. "Tonight, before witnesses, and beneath the eyes of the moon goddess herself, I formally recognize you as a carrier of the ancient blessing, worthy of protection and honor from every wolf within Whitmore territory." Elena rose to her feet, overwhelmed by the sudden weight of attention and recognition now directed toward her. She had spent so many weeks quietly hoping the whispers surrounding her might eventually fade, but standing here now, surrounded by undeniable proof of her abilities, she understood that her old life of anonymity had ended completely. As the ceremony continued, Elena felt a strange pull toward the ceremonial fire, an instinct she could not quite explain, guiding her steps forward until she stood directly before the flames. The gathered crowd fell silent, watching as she closed her eyes, and for a brief moment, the fire itself seemed to shift in color, burning silver and gold, rather than its usual orange and red. Within her mind, the woman made of moonlight appeared more vividly than ever before, her form nearly solid, her expression warm, with something that felt distinctly like pride. "You have accepted what you are, child," the voice whispered clearly through Elena's thoughts. "The time approaches when you must use this gift for purposes greater than healing alone. Conflict draws near, threatening lands both familiar and unfamiliar to you. When that moment arrives, trust the strength you carry within you, for it is greater than you yet understand." Elena's eyes opened, the vision fading as quickly as it had appeared, leaving her breathless and slightly disoriented before the watching crowd. Mabel caught her arm gently, steadying her, concern evident in her aged eyes. "What did you see?" Mabel asked quietly, once the ceremony had concluded and the crowd had begun dispersing into smaller groups, still buzzing with excited conversation about what they had witnessed. A warning, Elena said softly. Conflict is approaching, though I still don't fully understand the details. She said I would need to trust the strength within me when the moment arrives. Word of the ceremony spread rapidly beyond Whitmore's borders over the following days, carried by travelers and traders who had witnessed the healing firsthand, or heard detailed accounts from those who had. Within a week, the story had reached far beyond the immediate region, whispered in taverns and pack halls across multiple territories, growing more embellished with each retelling, though the core truth remained consistent enough to be undeniable. It was inevitable that word would eventually reach Blackthorn territory, carried by the very scouts Kane had dispatched weeks earlier to investigate rumors he had desperately hoped would prove false. When the scouts returned, their reports confirmed every fear that had been quietly building within Kane's chest since the messenger's first mention of a mysterious healer on Whitmore land. The scouts described the ceremony in vivid detail: the golden light, the instant healing of a severe infected wound, the old healer's declaration regarding an ancient blessing spoken of only in legend, and most damning of all, a name confirmed by multiple witnesses among the traveling merchants who had happened to be present. Elena Voss, the very mate Kane had rejected and banished from his pack without a second thought. Kane sat alone in his private quarters long after the scouts had delivered their report and departed, staring at nothing, the weight of what he had done finally crashing over him with a force that left him physically shaking. He had cast aside not merely a fated mate, but a wolf carrying the rarest and most sacred blessing known throughout wolf history, dismissing her as unworthy, based on nothing more than her low standing within his pack's rigid hierarchy. The hollow ache in his chest that had plagued him for weeks intensified suddenly, sharp and undeniable, as though his own body was punishing him further for the magnitude of his mistake. Kane pressed a hand against his chest, gasping slightly at the pain, understanding now with terrible clarity that his weakening condition would only continue worsening for as long as the rejection remained unresolved, if it could be resolved at all after everything he had done. Owen found him there hours later, still sitting motionless in the darkness, his expression haunted by realizations that had shattered every assumption he had built his identity upon as Blackthorn's proud and powerful alpha. "Kane," Owen said carefully, closing the door behind him. "The scout's report has spread through the pack already. Everyone knows now what she truly is, what you rejected." "I know," Kane said, his voice barely audible. "I know exactly what I've done, Owen. And I don't know if there's any path forward from here that doesn't end in complete ruin, for me and for this entire pack." Owen remained silent for a long moment, studying his alpha's broken expression with something caught between pity and lingering frustration. "Then perhaps," he said finally, "it's time you stopped wallowing in the mistake and started considering what might actually be done to correct it, before Ashgrove's forces decide our weakened state makes us an easy target worth striking." Kane looked up slowly, something shifting behind his exhausted eyes, the first faint spark of resolve beginning to emerge from beneath the crushing weight of guilt and regret that had settled over him since learning the full truth of what he had thrown away. Kane stood before his gathered pack the following morning, forcing strength into his voice, despite the persistent weakness still gripping his body. Every wolf present had heard the scout's report by now, and he could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on him from every direction, a stark contrast to the respect and admiration he had once commanded so effortlessly. "I made an error in judgment," Kane said, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard, the same courtyard where he had once so cruelly rejected Elena in front of these very witnesses. "I rejected my fated mate out of pride, dismissing her worth based on assumptions that proved entirely false. She carries a blessing greater than anything our pack has witnessed in generations, and I discarded her without a moment's consideration for what that decision might cost, not just myself, but every wolf who follows me." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some sympathetic, others clearly skeptical of their alpha's sudden change in tone. Owen stood nearby, watching carefully, ready to intervene should the crowd's mood turn openly hostile. "I intend to travel to Whitmore territory," Kane continued, "to seek her forgiveness, and to attempt to correct the terrible mistake I made. I do not know if she will accept my apology, nor do I believe I deserve easy forgiveness for how cruelly I treated her, but I owe her, and this pack, an honest attempt to make amends." "And if Ashgrove attacks while you're away seeking forgiveness from a woman you already cast aside once?" called out a voice from the crowd, sharp with barely concealed anger. Kane recognized the speaker as one of his senior guards, a wolf who had served the pack loyally for over a decade. Owen will remain here, prepared to lead our defenses should Ashgrove make any move during my absence, Kane replied evenly, though the question had struck at fears he himself harbored deeply. I do not take this decision lightly, nor do I underestimate the risk involved in my absence. But our pack's continued weakness stems directly from the mistake I made that night, and until it is addressed, however that resolution unfolds, we remain vulnerable, regardless of whether I stay or go. The crowd remained tense, uncertain, though no further open challenges emerged. Kane took this as reluctant acceptance, rather than true confidence, understanding that he would need to prove his sincerity through actions rather than words alone if he hoped to fully restore his pack's faith in his leadership. He departed within the hour, accompanied only by 2 trusted guards, traveling light and fast toward Whitmore territory. The journey gave him ample time to reflect on everything that had led to this moment, the arrogance that had driven his initial rejection, the slow unraveling of his strength and control in the weeks that followed, and the crushing guilt that had settled over him upon learning the full truth of what Elena truly represented. He thought of her voice that night in the courtyard, the desperate hope in her eyes before his rejection crushed it entirely, the quiet dignity with which she had accepted her banishment despite the injustice of it all. He had convinced himself, in the aftermath, that his decision had been about protecting his pack's reputation, ensuring an alpha of his standing was matched appropriately. Now, faced with the truth of what he had actually done, that justification felt hollow and pathetic. The journey toward Whitmore territory took nearly 3 days, Kane's weakened condition forcing more frequent rest than he would have preferred, each delay gnawing at his patience as reports continued arriving of increased Ashgrove activity along Blackthorn's borders. By the time he finally crossed into Whitmore land, exhaustion had settled deep into his bones, though determination kept him moving forward. Alpha Gareth's guards intercepted his small group almost immediately upon crossing the border, wary and suspicious of an unannounced Blackthorn Alpha traveling with only minimal escort. Kane raised his hands in a gesture of peace, requesting audience with their Alpha, explaining his purpose as clearly and honestly as he could manage. Word of his arrival reached Elena before she had any chance to prepare herself emotionally for the confrontation. Mabel delivered the news carefully, watching her young companion's reaction with careful attention. Kane Blackthorn has arrived at Whitmore's border, Mabel said. He requests an audience with you specifically, claiming he wishes to apologize for his actions and seek your forgiveness. Elena felt her stomach twist into painful knots, old wounds she had thought were healing, suddenly reopening at the mere mention of his name. Why now? She asked, her voice tighter than she intended. Why, after everything, would he suddenly decide he wants forgiveness? Perhaps guilt has finally caught up with him, Mabel suggested gently. Or perhaps he has learned the full truth of what you carry, and hopes to reclaim the bond, now that he understands its true value. Only you can determine his sincerity, child, but you do not have to grant him anything he has not properly earned. Elena sat in troubled silence for a long moment, memories of that humiliating night in the Blackthorn courtyard washing over her with renewed clarity. The public rejection, the cruel dismissal of her worth, the cold indifference in his eyes as he ordered her banishment without so much as a backward glance. And now, weeks later, he arrived seeking forgiveness, presumably only after learning what she truly represented. I'll see him, Elena said finally, straightening her shoulders with quiet resolve. But I won't make this easy for him, Mabel. He owes me an honest reckoning, not a hollow apology born from convenient timing. Alpha Gareth arranged the meeting to take place within the ceremonial clearing, neutral ground befitting the significance of the confrontation about to unfold. Elena arrived first, accompanied by Mabel, her heart pounding despite her outward composure. When Kane finally appeared, escorted by Gareth's guards, she barely recognized the wolf standing before her. Gone was the proud, commanding Alpha who had so coldly rejected her weeks earlier. In his place stood a gaunt, weary man, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and guilt, his once powerful frame diminished by whatever affliction had been steadily consuming him. Despite everything he had put her through, Elena felt an unwelcome flicker of concern at the sight of his obvious suffering. Elena, Kane said, his voice rough and unsteady. Thank you for agreeing to see me. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, given how I treated you, but I needed to see you, to apologize properly for the cruelty of my actions. You rejected me in front of the entire pack, Elena said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath the surface. You called me unworthy, banished me with nothing, and never once looked back to consider what might happen to me afterward. Why should I believe your apology is anything more than convenient timing, now that you've learned what I carry within me? Cain flinched at the accusation, though he did not attempt to deny its truth. You have every right to doubt my sincerity, Elena. I cannot fault you for that. But I promise you, this apology has nothing to do with what I've learned about your gifts. I have been suffering since that night, weakening steadily, my control over my own wolf slipping further with each passing week. I came to understand, slowly and painfully, exactly how badly I had wronged you, long before I learned the truth of what you carry. And if you hadn't learned that truth, Elena pressed, unwilling to let him escape the full weight of his actions so easily. Would you have come seeking forgiveness regardless, or does this apology only exist because you've realized what you actually threw away? Cain was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a raw honesty that surprised her. I don't know, Elena. I would like to believe I would have eventually recognized my mistake regardless, but I cannot promise you that with complete certainty. What I can promise is that whatever happens between us now, my apology and my regret are genuine, born from the suffering my own cruelty caused, not merely from opportunistic recognition of your value. Elena studied him carefully, searching for any hint of deception in his exhausted expression, finding instead only weary honesty and genuine remorse. It was not enough to erase the pain of his rejection entirely, but it was, perhaps, a beginning worth considering. I need time, Cain, she said finally. Time to decide whether forgiveness is even possible after everything you've done. You cannot simply arrive here, offer an apology, and expect everything to be resolved so easily. I understand, Cain said quietly. Take whatever time you need, Elena. I will not pressure you further. But please know that whatever you decide, I intend to spend the rest of my life proving that my regret is genuine, regardless of whether you ever find it within yourself to forgive me. As Cain departed the clearing under Gareth's watchful guard, Elena remained standing in the fading afternoon light, her emotions a tangled mixture of lingering resentment, cautious hope, and uncertainty about what path forward might actually be right. Mabel approached quietly, resting a comforting hand on her shoulder. What do you feel, child? Mabel asked gently. I don't know, Elena admitted honestly. Confused, mostly. Part of me wants to hate him completely for what he did, but another part of me remembers the bond we felt that night, before everything went wrong, and wonders if there might still be something worth salvaging, if he truly has changed. Then perhaps, Mabel said, the answer will reveal itself in time, as it so often does. For now, rest, and trust that whatever choice you eventually make, it will be the right one for you. The attack came without warning, 3 days after Cain's arrival on Whitmore land, shattering the fragile peace that had settled over the territory since the confrontation in the ceremonial clearing. Alpha Roland Ashgrove had grown impatient, waiting for Blackthorn's weakness to fully manifest, and upon learning that Cain himself had left his own territory to travel to Whitmore land, seized what he perceived as the perfect opportunity to strike at a target left temporarily, without its strongest leader present. But Roland's scouts had reported something else entirely, something that changed his calculations significantly. Reports of a wolf, carrying an ancient blessing, capable of healing wounds beyond natural explanation, residing openly on Whitmore territory. If such power could be captured and controlled, the strategic advantage would far outweigh whatever gains might be achieved by simply seizing Blackthorn's weakened lands. Roland redirected his forces accordingly, setting his sights on Whitmore territory instead, believing the smaller pack would prove far easier to overwhelm. Elena woke to the sound of distant howls, sharp with alarm, rather than the peaceful calls she had grown accustomed to hearing across Whitmore's quiet lands. Mabel was already awake, standing near the cabin's window, her expression tight with concern. Something is wrong, Mabel said. Those are warning calls, Elena, the kind used only when danger approaches. Elena dressed quickly, her heart pounding, as she followed Mabel outside, into the pale gray light of early dawn. Pack members rushed past them, some heading toward the eastern border, where the warning calls seemed to originate, others gathering weapons and preparing defensive positions around the central settlement. Alpha Gareth met them near the edge of the clearing, his expression grim and focused. Ashgrove forces have crossed our border, he said without preamble. Larger numbers than we anticipated. They seem specifically focused on reaching this settlement, rather than simply raiding our outer territories. They're coming for me, Elena said, the realization settling over her with cold certainty. They want to capture whatever power I carry. Gareth did not deny the possibility. Whatever their true motivation, we cannot allow them to succeed. Whitmore forces will hold the line as best we can, but I won't pretend our numbers match theirs favorably. Kane appeared suddenly, having heard the commotion from wherever he had been staying since his arrival. His expression alert, despite the persistent weakness still visible in his gaunt frame. I can fight, he said immediately. Whatever strength remains to me, it belongs to defending this territory now. Your strength has been failing for weeks, Elena said, unable to fully mask her concern, despite everything unresolved between them. You could collapse mid-battle. Then I'll collapse fighting for something that matters, Kane replied firmly, rather than standing uselessly aside, while others risk everything in my place. The battle that followed unfolded with brutal speed along Whitmore's eastern border. Ashgrove's forces pressing hard against the defensive lines Gareth's guards had scrambled to establish. Elena watched from a safer position near the settlement's edge, every instinct within her screaming to help somehow, though she possessed no combat training of her own. As the fighting intensified, wounded wolves began being carried back from the front lines, their injuries severe enough that Clara's usual remedies proved insufficient against the volume and severity of trauma, now flooding into the makeshift healing area. Elena rushed forward without hesitation, kneeling beside the first wounded guard, drawing upon the warmth within her chest with an urgency she had never before required. The healing came faster now than ever before, her control over the ability having grown considerably stronger through weeks of practice. One by one, she moved between wounded wolves, closing gashes, mending broken bones, easing the pain of those too severely injured for immediate full recovery. Each healing left her more exhausted than the last, but she pressed forward, refusing to let anyone die while she still possessed the strength to prevent it. Word of her healing abilities spread rapidly among the fighting forces, and something remarkable began happening as the battle continued. Whitmore wolves, who had been steadily losing ground against Ashgrove's superior numbers, found renewed strength and determination, inspired by the knowledge that their wounds, should they fall, would not go unattended. The tide of battle began shifting slowly, Whitmore's defensive lines holding steadier than Roland's forces had anticipated. Roland himself eventually appeared at the front lines, frustrated by the unexpected resistance his forces encountered, his eyes scanning the chaos of battle, until they landed on Elena, kneeling beside a group of wounded wolves near the settlement's edge, golden light still faintly visible around her healing hands. There, Roland called out to his nearest guards. That's her. Capture the healer, and this entire battle becomes irrelevant. A group of Ashgrove wolves broke away from the main fighting, charging directly toward Elena's position. Kane, positioned nearby despite his weakened condition, intercepted them before they could reach her, his diminished strength somehow finding renewed purpose in the immediate threat to Elena's safety. The confrontation that followed tested every remaining reserve of strength within Kane's exhausted body, his movements slower than they once would have been, his usual precision dulled by weeks of steadily declining health. But something within him refused to yield, some deep instinct recognizing that protecting Elena mattered more in this moment than any lingering pride or exhaustion he carried. Elena watched in horror as Kane struggled against multiple opponents, his weakened state making the confrontation far more dangerous than it should have been. Without fully considering the consequences, she rose to her feet, closing the distance between herself and the confrontation, the warmth within her chest surging with an intensity she had never experienced before. She reached out, pressing her palm against Kane's back as he struggled against his opponents, and a brilliant surge of golden light erupted outward, brighter and more powerful than anything she had summoned previously. The light washed over Kane, and immediately his exhaustion seemed to lift, strength flooding back into his weakened limbs, his movements suddenly regaining the speed and precision that had once made him among the most formidable alphas in the region. The Ashgrove wolves, who had been pressing their advantage, suddenly found themselves facing a fully restored opponent, and within moments, Kane had subdued them decisively, without inflicting any injuries beyond what was necessary to end the immediate threat. Roland, watching from a distance, realized with dawning alarm that whatever power Elena possessed, extended far beyond simple healing of wounds already sustained. "Retreat," Roland called out finally, recognizing that his forces had lost whatever advantage they believed they held. "Fall back. This battle is no longer worth the cost." Ashgrove's forces withdrew hastily, leaving Whitmore territory bruised but ultimately victorious, thanks in no small part to Elena's tireless healing efforts throughout the confrontation. As the chaos of battle finally settled into the quieter aftermath of tending remaining wounds and accounting for losses, Kane approached Elena, his expression a mixture of gratitude and renewed wonder. "You saved my life," he said quietly, "again, despite everything I've done to deserve otherwise." Elena studied him carefully, exhaustion evident in her own trembling limbs after the extraordinary effort the battle had demanded of her. "I couldn't watch you die, Kane. Whatever remains unresolved between us, I'm not capable of standing by while someone suffers when I have the power to help." "That," Kane said softly, "is precisely the kind of heart the moon goddess would choose to carry her greatest blessing. I understand now, more clearly than ever, exactly what I nearly destroyed through my own foolish pride." In the days following the battle, Whitmore territory slowly began healing from the chaos of conflict, wounds mending both physical and otherwise, as pack members worked together to restore what damage the fighting had caused. Elena spent long hours tending to those still recovering, her healing abilities now fully embraced by the entire community, rather than viewed with the cautious curiosity that had once surrounded her arrival. Kane remained on Whitmore land during this period of recovery, his strength fully restored following the surge of healing energy Elena had directed toward him during the battle. Word had already reached Blackthorn territory of the confrontation and its outcome, and Owen sent regular messages confirming that Ashgrove's forces had retreated fully behind their own borders, apparently unwilling to risk further confrontation after witnessing the extent of Elena's abilities firsthand. Alpha Gareth called a gathering shortly after the immediate crisis had passed, wishing to formally address the pack regarding the battle's aftermath and the role Elena had played in securing their victory. The entire community gathered once more within the familiar ceremonial clearing, though the atmosphere carried a different weight this time, gratitude and reverence replacing the cautious curiosity that had characterized earlier gatherings. "Elena Voss," Gareth announced before the assembled crowd, "has proven beyond any doubt the depth and significance of the blessing she carries. Not only has she healed our sick and injured throughout her time among us, but she personally turned the tide of a battle that could have ended in devastating losses for our entire pack. Whitmore territory owes her a debt that mere words cannot adequately express." The crowd erupted in genuine applause and cheers, a stark contrast to the wary silence that had greeted her presence months earlier. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the acceptance and gratitude now surrounding her, so different from the humiliation and rejection she had experienced during her final moments within Blackthorn territory. Kane stood near the edge of the gathering, watching the scene unfold, with an expression that mixed genuine pride with lingering guilt over his own past treatment of the woman now being celebrated so warmly by an entire pack that was not even her own. When the formal ceremony concluded and the crowd began dispersing into smaller celebratory gatherings, he approached Elena quietly, finding her standing near the edge of the clearing, still processing the emotional weight of everything that had unfolded. "They love you here," Kane observed softly. "Truly love you, for exactly who you are, without any pretense or hidden agenda." "They gave me shelter when I had nothing," Elena replied. "They saw value in me long before I fully understood what I carried within myself. I owe Whitmore Pack more than I could ever properly repay." "As do I," Kane said quietly, "though in a very different way. Elena, I've had considerable time to reflect on everything that happened between us, from that terrible night in the Blackthorn courtyard, to the battle we just survived together. I know I have no right to ask anything more of you, given how deeply I wronged you, but I need to ask, honestly, where we stand now, if anywhere at all." Elena turned to face him fully, studying his expression carefully, searching for any remaining trace of the arrogant pride that had driven his initial rejection. She found instead only genuine humility, the quiet strength of someone who had been fundamentally changed by suffering and honest reflection. "I won't pretend the pain of that rejection has fully disappeared, Kane," she said honestly. "You humiliated me in front of an entire pack, discarded me without a second thought, and left me to fend for myself with nothing. That kind of wound doesn't simply vanish because circumstances eventually changed." I understand, Kane said, bracing himself for whatever rejection might follow, believing he deserved nothing less, given his own past cruelty. But, Elena continued, I've also watched you these past weeks. I've seen genuine remorse, not simply convenient timing, tied to learning what I carry. I've watched you fight to protect me despite your own weakened condition, willing to risk everything, without any guarantee of forgiveness in return. That tells me something important about who you truly are, beneath the pride that once governed your decisions. Hope flickered cautiously in Kane's exhausted eyes. What are you saying, Elena? I'm saying, Elena replied carefully, that I'm willing to consider rebuilding what was broken between us, slowly, and on my own terms. Not because fate demands it, and not because of whatever power I carry, but because I've seen enough evidence of genuine change to believe it might be possible to build something real between us, given time and continued effort on your part. Relief and gratitude flooded across Kane's face, though he restrained himself from any premature celebration, understanding clearly that Elena's cautious willingness represented an opportunity to prove himself worthy, not an automatic restoration of everything he had so carelessly discarded. I will spend however long it takes, Kane said solemnly, proving that I deserve this chance you're offering me. Elena, I will not take it for granted, not for a single moment. In the weeks that followed, Elena divided her time between continuing her healing work on Whitmore land and slowly, carefully, rebuilding a tentative connection with Kane, who had taken up residence nearby, rather than immediately returning to Blackthorn territory. Owen managed pack affairs capably in his absence, and reports confirmed that Ashgrove forces remained quiet behind their own borders, apparently unwilling to risk further confrontation with a pack now openly allied with someone carrying such formidable abilities. Alpha Gareth, recognizing the shifting political landscape these developments represented, began quietly opening diplomatic channels between Whitmore and Blackthorn territories, sensing an opportunity for meaningful alliance between packs that had previously maintained only distant, cautious relationships. Elena found herself, almost without realizing it, becoming a unifying figure between multiple territories, her healing work and her growing bond with Kane, creating bridges that had never before existed between these separate wolf communities. Mabel watched these developments with quiet satisfaction, her years of studying ancient prophecy finally yielding tangible results she had never expected to witness within her own lifetime. You are becoming exactly what the old stories described, she told Elena one evening, as they sat together beside the familiar warmth of the cabin's hearth. A wolf capable of healing, not just wounds of the body, but divisions between entire communities. I never imagined this path for myself, Elena admitted, not during those quiet years within Blackthorn territory, overlooked and unimportant. Not even during those darkest hours after my banishment, when I believed I had lost everything worth having. Perhaps, Mabel said gently, that is precisely why the goddess chose you, Elena. Not despite your humble beginnings, but because of the compassion and resilience they forged within you. A wolf who had never known hardship might never have developed the strength necessary to carry such a significant blessing. As months passed, Elena's role continued expanding beyond anything she had initially anticipated. She traveled between territories, offering healing where needed, helping negotiate tentative peace agreements between packs that had maintained hostile relationships for generations. Kane remained steadily by her side throughout this journey, proving, through consistent action rather than empty words, that his transformation was genuine and lasting. The bond between them slowly rebuilt itself, not through the sudden completion that fate had originally intended, but through patient effort, honest communication, and mutual respect earned gradually over time. Elena never forgot the pain of that initial rejection, but she found, increasingly, that she no longer needed to carry it as a wound. Instead, it had become simply part of the story that had shaped her into the woman she was steadily becoming. Standing once more beneath a full moon, though this time surrounded by allies rather than facing banishment, Elena felt the warmth in her chest pulse with quiet contentment. Whatever trials still awaited her, whatever further conflicts might test the fragile peace now growing between long-divided packs, she understood clearly that she was no longer the overlooked, unimportant wolf who had once stood alone in the Blackthorn courtyard. She was something far greater now, chosen not for status or birthright, but for the strength of a heart that refused to break, no matter how many times the world had tried to convince her otherwise. And as she looked toward Kane standing quietly beside her, his own transformation as significant in its own way as her own. She allowed herself, finally, to believe in the possibility of a future, built not on fate alone, but on genuine, hard-earned love.